It's never fun to pick up the pieces from a blowout, but we can take what we can learn from this game and just focus on what we can bring forward. That's what we're going to do today on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. All right. Just bear with me here, all right? I know nobody wants to think about this game for any longer than they have to, and this will be the last day. We go into Lions mode tomorrow. We got crossover Thursday with Matt Derry of Locked On Lions, and we're previewing and we're on, right? Short week. That's the blessing of it. But I do want to share some things that I noticed with the tape and things that especially will carry forward. The themes of my immediate game recap, I want to revisit, I guess, one of them. I don't really need to revisit the Cousins thing. A lot of that has been covered ad nauseum. I am going to do a very in-depth thing on Patreon that will be up today for patrons and should be made public tomorrow on Thursday. So you can check that out if you really want to know like what went wrong or what didn't with Kirk Cousins. But suffice to say, yeah, he just kind of got worse as the game went along. He started out actually playing pretty well. He never gave up the hero ball mentality, and I actually like that. I don't want him to start turtling. I like the idea he was still looking and trying to create. He was doing a bad job of that, and so you got to fix how he does it. But I'm not going to complain about the trying. So that was nice, but ultimately he did a really poor job of it, and eventually he stopped really trying to find reads and make things happen, and he just sort of started finding nothing and he just sort of started going with whatever his first instinct was, and lo and behold, Kirk Cousins doesn't have great first instincts. He never really has had that improv gene, and so he just sort of leaned on a skill he didn't have, and that doesn't seem like the way to extend and create for Kirk Cousins. But we'll talk about that. I'm going to talk about that in a lot more depth with a lot more film and stuff. So let me give you other stuff, right? There's another piece on Patreon about Irv Smith. I'll tell you right now, there's a lot more good on his game than I expected to find, considering kind of what his game was known for. I don't think there's enough good to like outweigh the bad. He had a pretty bad route that didn't get any separation, but he was also sort of doomed on that. He was cutting inside against inside leverage. You kind of never have a shot there. And then the other one was he was like chipping and trying to outrun a cornerback or a safety. Like, you're going to be slower than that guy. The drop, of course, is brutal. There's no excuse for that. You just got to catch that one. It was screw up by the safety, I believe it was by Gardner Johnson, if I remember, that allowed that play to happen in the first place. Phenomenal Kirk rep to find it. It was the drop, and Kirk sort of started going downhill after it. But there were a lot of other instances of like finding separation, finding the right place to be, using his speed, couple of decent blocks in there I can feel pretty good about. So I think Irv Smith actually did a lot more in this game than it might look to the naked eye. And I think he sort of proved to the coaches, hey, if you give him another big role again, it's going to go better next time. He's got the skill set for it. You can do that. Offensive line wise, yeah, up and downs for everybody. I think I can't really look at anybody and say they had a good day. People are sort of finding a couple of Garrett Bradbury highlights here and there of like him anchoring versus Jordan Davis, which is hilarious because that was like the whole thing going into the game was, oh no, he's going to bowl him back. He might have been the single guy that got like bowled back the least. Ezra Cleveland, I thought, had a phenomenal game coming off of it. I could not have been more wrong. There were so many problems on that tape, but volatile offensive line tape, you're going to focus on the negatives more than the positives because offensive line is like naturally that kind of position where they're so focused on preventing things that when nothing happens, all you did was your job. And when something happens, you didn't do your job. So you're always going to focus more on when something happens than when nothing happens. and nothing happens but with flair doesn't count for anymore. So that's why offensive line is like that. But I kind of like to reject that. I prefer to say, man, that was a really good rep, and I'm going to give you lots of credit for it. And it's going to make my offensive line opinions differ from a lot of people. So I'll say with Cleveland, rough night consistency wise, but a lot of highlights, like a lot of real fun highlights. Darisaw had a few mistakes. O'Neal got walked back a bunch. Ed Ingram had a bunch of mistakes. So rough time on the offensive line. Pressure did ruin a few plays, but really the problem the offensive line had was with a lot of free rushers and free blitzers. And a lot of that was just Jonathan Gannon sending more guys than the Vikings had in protection. They lived in a lot of this game in empty, so nobody in the backfield but the quarterback, and 5-man protections, like just 5 people up. And if you send 6 blitzers against that, it makes the quarterback responsible for somebody. And sometimes that play call didn't have a hot route, and I think that sucks. Even in chasing the game situations where you're down 17 points in the fourth quarter, you still have to have somebody to check it down to. If that happens, somebody to throw it hot to, because often in that situation, if they're sending 6 people and you're running, say, like a simple 4 verticals, well, that 5th receiver needs to be a hot. Don't run 5 verticals, and they did that in the red zone a couple times. It was like 5 curls, 5 10-yard curls. Like make one of those a little spot route so that if there is a blitzer, your running back can find the spot. And Kirk Cousins should have leeway. If he doesn't, it's a huge problem. And if he does, it's a problem that he didn't use it. He should have leeway to make those adjustments because they were showing some of those blitzes. Like that, it wasn't really that disguised, or it was at least like vanilla looks. And you have to account for all the linebackers when you're setting your protections. It's part of the protections is who all out there could be a blitzer, and they're just lining up normally right now, and you set your protection accordingly. So that's all stuff that needs to happen. Some of that stuff needs to happen pre-snap. Some of that stuff needs to happen post-snap. A guy fires off and is not going to be blocked, and you have to kind of say, "Oh, crud," and get it to someone. And that's on Kirk Cousins. So a lot of that stuff was just bad. It was just a lot of bad stuff. This really does feel like a burn the tape game because a lot of the things that went wrong, the note is stop doing that. The note is like, hey, pick up the blitz like you normally should be expected to. The note is don't throw off your back foot against pressure and throw a giant fade into the end zone that's a ball up for grabs. And especially don't do it twice in a row. That's the note. And it's like, well, yeah, duh. That should always be the expectation. And so the note is just play up to the expectation of an NFL player for a lot of players. And this is not really helpful to go in depth. And it's not really a teachable moment. It's just man, that one was bad. Let's just forget about it and try to be better next time. So this does feel like a burn the tape game, at least on offense. There is a bunch of stuff on defense. I'm not going to be able to go into defense in as much depth in terms of like my tape review content. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about defense. There's a few central questions, a lot of what happened and did they get better in the second half? Is there something we can build on there? And we're going to get into all of that. But first, let me talk to you about LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn is the best network to post a job. It's hiring season in the fall and September. And you need the right people on your team to help your business fire on all cylinders. LinkedIn is the #1 rated hiring platform for small businesses rated by small businesses in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. It's a network of over 810 million people. You know what LinkedIn is. You've all heard of it because it's a ubiquitous media platform and it's perfect for hiring. So LinkedIn Jobs can help you find those candidates you want to talk to faster with their professional network and all of their tools like screening questions and everybody being sorted by the right experience. Every week, nearly 40 million seekers visit LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Check out, if you want a little bit more in-depth than what I can get into on a podcast, I would love it if you came and joined me on Patreon at patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. You get weekly tape breakdowns and the occasional random jotting if I'm feeling it. So let's talk defense. One of the biggest questions that I've gotten that I really set out to answer was, how did they turn it around? Is there something we can build on going down 24 points right away and then shoring up? I don't think I'm happy with the answer I came away with, but I do think it's right. So, first off, you got to go like with what went wrong to then figure out like did that get fixed, right? And what went wrong was just bad zone defense. For one, it was old zone defense. Usually with a match zone, um, you'll be hitting landmarks more than you will in man match. That's really the difference here. In a Mike Zimmer defense that the Vikings used to run, they would run it was you call it man match, or I would call it cover seven, is a colloquial name for it, or is the name like Nick Saban uses. Same thing Saban does, things same thing Belichick does. Everybody's got some of it in their defense, and Zimmer ran it very pure. But the idea is you pick a guy and there is a set, kind of a flow chart of rules. And you say, I've got the outermost receiver. Unless he does this, then I've got a different guy, and there's kind of some if thens. But more or less, I've got him man to man. And then there's some adjustments that can be made to that. Zone match is a super similar principle, but instead of calling you number them off, it's just saying, I've got the one, you've got the two, you've got the three. Zone defenses are still about landmarks and areas, but once you pick a guy up, you have him. The Vikings weren't playing that. They were playing a very traditional, very old spot droppy zone. And that's weird. Nobody does that anymore. And we kind of learned why. I don't know. This is, I think, where a more salient critique of Ed Donatel. Ed Donatel came in with a plan that I think outthought himself. I think you go into a zone match team, you kick the crap out of a team, and then you go, yeah, but now they're going to see it coming, so we got to play a change up. Well, that's not what you were practicing. That's not what this personnel has been doing for the last 8 years. You've got guys or 8 years. Like you've got guys like Eric Kendricks who have been here. Harrison Smith has been here for 10 years. They have been playing man match. They have been matching routes. They have been staying tight to guys, hip to hip with guys. And now you're asking them to essentially play college defense where you just like find a landmark. That's probably unfair, but you're finding a landmark and you're watching the quarterback's eyes and you're breaking on the ball. That's what traditional spot drop, like landmark zone defense is. And there was a lot of sitting at a landmark, and you got two guys at two landmarks, and somebody just finds the hole between those two landmarks and catches a pass completely uncontested. What I found a lot more of than I kind of thought, all right, well, they all hit their landmarks, and then things just got caught in front of them, and what are the players supposed to do? I found a lot more just straight up mistakes on the players than I thought I would find. A lot more that was just like, well, they're sort of supposed to widen out a little bit more there. Or in particular, I found a lot more mistakes on Cam Dantzler than I thought. I thought he had a great game coming off of that game. Coming out of it, he had the one great drive. Every time he was in the shot, he was running up and making plays near the line of scrimmage, and he was in good coverage a lot. But he made mistakes. There is a Cam Dantzler thing that seems to be persisting from the Zimmer era. Where he will bail off. He'll give you 8 yards of cushion and then bail off just as hard as you are. Like he's still matching releases. And you don't have to do that. The point of cushion is to give you a sense to read. And you don't have to do that unless you think it's a go ball. Now, sometimes you just think it's a go ball. You're wrong. The guy curls underneath you. There's nothing you can do. But also his ability to stop that bail, plant his foot and drive on things just leaves a lot to be desired. And so it's very slow. And so Devonta Smith just caught some in front of him. And then he just like busted 2 coverages. I guess now we should talk about the long touchdown, the Quez Watkins touchdown. So the broadcast put that on the safety. Essentially what you had was a go route, which is a clear route. It's a through route. And it's not even in the progression, that Quez Watkins route. But all it is you got a guy in the slot and he runs straight down the field. Very simple. And all it's supposed to do is occupy a guy. All it needs to do is bring somebody bring somebody way downfield so that there's one less defender to deal with everything else. And in this case, everything else is an out route. That's what the play was really designed to get to. The coverage that the Vikings were in, and Cody Alexander did a great breakdown of this. I will link it in the show notes if I remember to. If not, yell at me and I'll add it in. But essentially, the coverage they were in was a quarters look. They were in their quarter half, their cover 6, where you have cover 2 on one side, cover 4 on the other side, that we've talked about a lot. The quarters side was the side um, at at fault here. And Cameron Dantzler has what everybody calls mod coverage, which is man, outside, and deep, MOD mod. And that means that you take basically whatever's deep on the sideline, right? You don't take anything underneath, you don't break on anything inside. And the problem is the Eagles had 2 receivers in a stack, and they're specifically trying to create this problem. Who's outside, right? They're sort of running who's going to go deep, who's outside. And when you have confusion about that, I believe the sort of coaching point is, okay, then take who's deep. And Cameron Dantzler didn't. He tries to nail down on an out route. That out route is also Cam Bynum thinking it's his job. And then Bynum sees it and he's got to go chase, right? He's got to turn around and chase, but it's way too late. So that looks like Cam Bynum took the cheese, right? And that's what I said on Twitter. I was like, Bynum took the cheese because that's what Troy Aikman was describing, and it looked like a compelling enough case. But I think understanding that the quarters and the point of mod is that when those 2 routes cross and now one is outside and one is deep, you favor toward deep and let the safety drive on it. And really, Cam Bynum was in a pretty rough spot to drive on that out route, that deep out, and that probably was the throw they were trying to get, and that throw would have been there, but the clear out route ended up being totally unguarded, and the quarterback is taught to alert it, which means just check it, make sure that nothing like this happens, just check for a coverage bust and then go into your real progression. But it's like one of the first things that they look at is what the alert like is to alert the go real quick, or alert the through route, and then you go into your progression. So he alerts the through route and goes, "Oh my God, there is a coverage bust," and then he just kind of winds up and throws. So that was on Cam Bynum or Cam Dantzler, wrong Cam. There was another one on Cam Dantzler that was a slant where Dantzler was supposed to take things inside. It was another one with Shannon Sullivan. This could have been Sullivan's fault. Again, it's like hard for me to know. In zone match, I tend to think that everything is supposed to be passed off, especially something that develops that quickly. I believe this was Dragon or Slant Flat. Both of them cover the slat. Nobody covers the slant, and AJ Brown catches. It was the one where AJ Brown caught it with nobody around him and danced for a ton of yards, I believe near the end of the half. Not great stuff. So again, we've got communication problems, we have busts, we had all kinds of problems of that all over the place. And I think this is just a defense that's not used to playing spot drop zone. And if you're going to play spot drop zone, like get guys tight to routes, get guys in receivers' pockets. Tell them, when somebody is, when the rules declare that this is your guy, whether those rules are about space or they're about, relation to each other, you've got to match with them. Like, let's take this into the current decade, y'all. Like, this is not Pete Carroll cover 3 anymore, which was kind of the last great spot drop scheme that we've seen in the NFL. But then things turned around, right? So did that reflect an improvement in the defense? The answer is kind of a disappointing kind of. I'll explain. But first, let me talk to you about a good old Gramble. Look, a lot of people have taken the strategy, and I'm not. This is not Grambling advice. All right, I do not advise on Grambles. You don't want to take my Grambling advice, but I'm just saying. Zostradamus is at it again. The rabbit picks were correct. Zoe, the rabbit, picks the games on Twitter. You can go check them out. Her deciding which game, which side of the spread, she is right an alarming amount of the time. Like to the point where it's starting to feel like this can't be blind luck anymore, and there might actually be something to this. And I promise you all that I am not cheating. I'm not putting like something extra on one side or the other. If I were, this would absolutely be a worse result. This is all her. So Gramble with Zoe. You can do that at betonline.net. You can Gramble on Vikings games, basketball, baseball, hockey, whatever. You can do player props. Bet right in the middle of live games. They got everything under the sun. That is at betonline.net, where the game starts. So what happened in the second half to make the Vikings come out a little bit better? Well, Here's the deal. This is where we can zoom too far in and we can start to find patterns where there really aren't any, because like 2 or 3 drives in a row with the same result is not indicative of like a larger pattern unless we find something in there that is. And I'll spoil it right now. There isn't really. They played the game basically the same. They busted a lot less. They had a lot fewer miscommunication errors. Played a little bit better against the run, but I think they just sort of improved. I think they just sort of shored up and calmed down and settled in a little bit. But it was still a lot of the same defense. They didn't make some big adjustment, some big schematic thing. And we can sort of read into the fluky result of drives a little bit too much. So here is how the second half went. The Eagles' first possession drove pretty far down the field and ended in a blocked kick. The Eagles' second possession was driving a little bit, and then a first down holding penalty set up a 1st and 20 that they couldn't dig out of. So you got like way behind the chains. And by the way, they let him out of like 2nd and 19 a couple of times, or 2nd and 16 or something a couple of times in this game. So they just finally got him to stay behind the sticks after they put themselves behind the sticks with a holding penalty, and that was on them. Third drive, they got 2 plays in, screen goes off of someone's hands and into Jordan Hicks. Interception, Vikings ball at the 9. Fourth drive, it's 24-7 with like 5 minutes left, and they just run the ball a whole bunch, and that's about it. And then that was the rest of the game. So they weren't quite as earned as I would say. Now, that doesn't mean that they were void of good plays. There were some good plays, but I'm not ready to say the defense actually turned it around and was fine. I'm not ready at all to say that Ed Donatel made some secret adjustment. I don't really think he did. They did play people a little bit more. What I saw a lot of, especially when there was someone in the flat, was the Vikings would kind of back off, be in their zone. But when there's a like motion to the fat or somebody to the flat, when there's someone fast to the flat, somebody going out for a swing pass, a crosser, a little flare out from a tight end or something, whenever that happens, it is someone's job to go pick it up. And that person should run at it. That person should go get near that player. And hey, if it's a double move and they cut up field on you, you got to be ready for that. But that doesn't mean don't go. And they were just really slow about that. It was a lot of, they were just kind of sitting in their zone, waiting for someone to come through. But you have to be able to have those adjustments and things. It was there was not enough adaptability to the zone coverage. Zone match can work. A lot of people run it, but this is a very neutered version of zone match. They're not manning up. They're not doing any of their fun blitz things. They're not doing any of the fun pressures that made Fangio so famous. It was really his pressure packages that make Fangio Fangio. We didn't have any of that. We had a few blitzes. We've got a lot of interesting 4-man pressures, but nothing really too exotic. And it just kind of ends up being this really like default Madden defense. And that sucks. It's awful. And there's a reason nobody runs it anymore, because these quarterbacks are good enough nowadays that they can just sit back and carve up whatever. And receivers and quarterbacks are good enough at routes that are called like search routes, which means just find a hole and I'll throw at it. It's just sort of pathetic. It was a pathetic effort on defense. The second half was fine, but it was really not better than fine. And they got a couple of lucky breaks that helped sort of cement it and prevent a 24-7 game from becoming something a lot worse. I don't know. There's a lot more that I could get into, like individually. The backup linemen got washed out a ton. A lot of the bad run plays were on the backups, and I think they rotated them in too much. A lot of people noticed that on the game night. I think my tape watch kind of confirms that. Cameron Dantzler, after that slant bust I talked about, he got benched and Caleb Evans came in. I don't know about bench. He rotated out for a series. That can be normal, and Kevin O'Connell sort of poo-pooed the whole thing and said, oh yeah, we just wanted to get him in some. That can be normal to just like have a backup corner come in for a drive, just like you'd have a backup tackle come in for a drive, right? Defensive tackle, like you're just keeping guys fresh. Didn't seem like that was the case, because if they were doing that, they probably would have rotated Patrick Peterson out some too. The safeties I thought were okay. They're breaking on things as fast as they can, but they probably need to be a little more aggressive. I think that's the note in total about the Vikings defense is when you see it, go get it and be a little bit more confident in that. When you see, hey, this is my trigger. There's a guy to the flat. That's my job. I have to go get it. Don't be so scared of going. And they're just reading and thinking really hard right now. So everything comes out a couple steps late. Breaking on stuff comes out a couple steps late. And then, gosh, I think I saw like 6 or 7 miscommunications. Some of them were full on coverage busts where two guys did the wrong thing. A whole bunch of times there's a thread on Twitter, I'm just going to start, of Viking defenders in landmark zones just on top of each other, just 1 yard away from each other. What are you guarding? Somebody's in the wrong place. Somebody is not in the right landmark. And it looks, a lot of times, it looks like two people doing the same job and people not really understanding what their job is supposed to be in that coverage or that or this one. It was worse than in week one, and you don't want it to get worse as the season goes on. So it's a lot of stuff to clean up, and they better get that figured out because there's a very good offense coming to US Bank Stadium. Lions are putting up 35 a game. You got to stymie that. Um, but I guess now we should put this one away. As much as it's all very frustrating, this is a burn the tape game. Take this tape, pick out a couple of plays, whatever teachable moments you can find, and then otherwise say, all right, let's wash our hands of this one. Let's not let it get to us. Let's all just forget this one totally happened. We're going to burn the tape in a barrel outside, and we're going to move on to the Lions, and we're not going to let this become who we are, and we're not going to let this get into our heads any more than it probably already is. I think that's the move with this game. And that's a real bummer because this was a chance for the Vikings to prove they belonged on a national stage, and they proved that they absolutely do not. And now they got to prove otherwise. So the Lions are up next. Crossover Thursdays tomorrow with Matt Derry. We'll do our You Betcha Gramblin segment. We'll do bold predictions on Friday like we always do. And then we got another game. I'll see you all then. And as always, Skol.